In just 60 seconds, Donald Trump did something no American president had ever done before. He looked straight at the most spiritually powerful man on the planet and decided to treat him like a political enemy. And what happened next was something nobody in Washington, Rome, or anywhere in between saw coming. The moment Pope Leo XIV heard the President of the United States calling him weak, liberal, and bad for the country, the entire world held its breath. Every journalist, every commentator, every scroll-addicted viewer online was bracing for either silence or a carefully worded diplomatic dodge. But what came back instead was something that hit the room like a quiet thunderclap inside a cathedral at midnight. Not loud, not angry, just impossible to ignore. Before we go any deeper into this collision, hit that like button and subscribe right now, because trust me, this story is only getting started, and you do not want to be the person who missed the moment history got strange. It started on a regular Monday morning. No warning signs, no build-up, just Donald Trump, a phone, and a Truth Social post that would ripple across continents before most people had finished their morning coffee. The target was not a senator, not a foreign leader threatening tariffs, not a judge blocking a policy. It was Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope, a man who had barely settled the weight of that white robe onto his shoulders before suddenly finding his name typed into the same digital feed where Trump had previously attacked rival politicians, news anchors, and foreign diplomats alike. The post hit hard and direct. Trump accused the Pope of being soft on crime, terrible on foreign policy, and almost suggested that the Vatican had only selected an American pope as a strategic move to push back against the Trump administration. His exact framing was stunning in its confidence. He claimed the church elected Leo because, in his words, they thought that would be the best way to deal with President Donald J. Trump. The lights inside every major newsroom flickered with urgency. Anchors shuffled papers. Producers scrambled. Because this was not a normal news cycle moment. This was the President of the United States essentially filing a political grievance against the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. Over 50 million right inside America's borders. This was not a small target. This was the biggest spiritual institution on the face of the earth, and the clock was already ticking on how it would respond. The studio air felt different that morning. Heavier. Like everyone inside could sense that what was unfolding was not going to disappear with the next news cycle. Anchors spoke carefully, choosing their words the way people do when they know the subject is bigger than normal political drama. Analysts leaned into their microphones. The murmur in the background of every broadcast carried that particular nervous energy that only shows up when something genuinely unprecedented starts unfolding in real time. And what made it feel so strange was the target himself, because Pope Leo XIV did not walk into this fight the way politicians do. He did not hold a press conference. He did not tweet back. He did not call a rapid response meeting with communications staff. Instead, he simply continued doing what he had been doing since the moment he stepped into his role. He kept talking about peace. That was the answer. Not a counterattack, not a defense, not a carefully prepared political rebuttal, just peace. Spoken calmly, clearly, and with the kind of quiet authority that does not need volume to carry weight. His message was rooted in the gospel. Blessed are the peacemakers. He said it plainly, without drama, without theater. And somehow that simplicity landed with more force than any sharp political comeback could have managed. Because in a world where every response to an attack is expected to come back louder, angrier, and more pointed than the original, he just refused to play by those rules entirely. The cameras caught every second of it, and you could feel the shift in real time. Trump, meanwhile, was not backing down, not even slightly. He doubled down in person while speaking to reporters. His jaw was set, his voice carrying that familiar blunt certainty that his base responds to like a signal. He repeated his complaints. The Pope was liberal. The Pope was weak. The Pope did not understand how the world actually worked. And then came something that added an entirely different layer of controversy on top of everything else. His team began sharing AI-generated images online that made the president look almost messianic, wrapping religious imagery around his political brand at the exact same moment he was publicly attacking the most visible religious leader on the planet. The irony was visible from orbit. People who remembered Trump holding a Bible in front of St. John's Episcopal Church during the protests of 2020, standing stiff and silent in front of the cameras after law enforcement had cleared the area. Those people were now watching him criticize the Pope for talking too much about about peace during a time of war. The same Trump who had called the Bible his favorite book without ever being able to name a single verse. The same Trump who had sold a branded presidential Bible, manufactured in China, for $100 a copy. And now he was lecturing the head of the Catholic Church about morality. The internet did not let that slide quietly. But underneath the noise, something more serious was unfolding, because this clash was not happening in a vacuum. It was playing out against the backdrop of a real and escalating conflict. The United States and Iran, a war that had already driven tension levels to places people were increasingly uncomfortable naming out loud. And Pope Leo XIV had been vocal about it from the beginning. His Easter Sunday address had been a direct and public call for peace, specifically referencing the bloodshed and suffering attached to that conflict. That speech was what originally lit the fuse. Trump had heard it as a criticism, as interference, as a liberal pope using spiritual authority to undercut American foreign policy. And so the Truth Social post came, sharp, immediate, personal. But here is what made the pope's position uniquely powerful in that moment. He was not just offering an abstract religious sentiment. He was speaking about a real war, with real people dying, at a real moment when world leaders were being asked to choose between escalation and restraint. His message was not coming from a place of political strategy. It was coming from centuries of theological teaching about the sanctity of human life, the moral cost of violence, and the responsibility that power carries when it is used carelessly. And that depth was exactly what made the contrast so jarring. On one side, a president treating geopolitical conflict like a dominance game to be won through aggression. On the other side, a pope treating the same conflict like a moral emergency that required a completely different kind of courage. The collision was not just political, it was philosophical. And then came the layer that made the whole situation even more complicated than it already appeared: the Pentagon meeting. Shortly after Pope Leo's January address to diplomats at the Vatican, Pentagon officials had quietly reached out and requested a meeting with Vatican representatives in Washington. The details of that meeting were disputed. Vatican sources and Pentagon sources were telling different versions of what happened and what was said. But the fact that it happened at all spoke volumes, because think about what that means. The United States military leadership sitting down with representatives of the Catholic Church to discuss, in some form, the tone and content of the Pope's public statements. That is not a routine diplomatic exchange. That is something closer to a pressure conversation. And when that story started surfacing alongside Trump's public attacks, the picture it painted was of an administration that had been trying to manage the Pope's messaging long before it escalated into an open fight. The Vatican pushed back, quietly but clearly, because a pope does not answer to the Pentagon. That is not how any of this works. The Vatican operates under its own diplomatic logic, its own centuries-deep understanding of when to speak and when to stay silent, and its own sense of what spiritual authority actually means in a world full of political noise. And Pope Leo XIV had made his position clear. He did not see himself as a political figure. He was not trying to enter a debate with the president. But when the message of the gospel was being weaponized, when peace was being framed as weakness, when war was being treated as something casual and manageable, he was going to keep speaking, loudly if necessary, calmly if possible. Over 50 million Americans identify as Catholic. That number is not a footnote. It is a tectonic fact sitting underneath this entire story, because those 50 million people are not some monolithic bloc with identical politics or identical loyalties. They include Trump voters. They include members of his own cabinet. They include people who had been navigating the complicated space between their religious identity and their political identity for years, sometimes with great discomfort. And now their spiritual leader and their president were openly in conflict. That creates a kind of internal tension that does not get resolved by a news cycle. It gets carried home. It gets discussed at dinner tables. It filters into how people feel about Sunday Mass and about voting booths and about which version of leadership they actually trust when things get genuinely hard. Because Trump's brand of leadership offers something real and something that a lot of people find deeply appealing: certainty, decisiveness, the sense that someone is in charge and willing to fight without hesitation. In a world that feels chaotic and threatening, that is not nothing. That is actually a powerful emotional offer. But Pope Leo's approach offers something different: not weakness, not passivity, something closer to moral endurance. The idea that real strength is not always about the loudest move. Sometimes it is about staying consistent when everyone around you is losing their footing. Sometimes it is about refusing to lower your standards just because someone powerful is pressuring you to. History tends to remember both kinds of leadership, and history tends to have a complicated opinion about which one actually served people best. The question a political analyst put to the camera during a live broadcast said it plainly. Does this administration actually stand to gain anything from picking a fight with the most popular leader of 1.5 billion Catholics? The answer came back just as plain: not much. But that has never been the point. The point has always been that this administration does not like dissent. Not from political opponents, not from foreign allies, not from European partners with different views on foreign policy, and apparently not from a pope who gave a State of the World speech in January that did not align with Washington's preferred narrative. So the fight happened, and it kept going, and it keeps going still. What makes it impossible to look away from is not the personal drama between two powerful men. It is what the drama is actually revealing beneath the surface. Two completely different worldviews about how leadership is supposed to work. Two different answers to the question of what strength looks like when the stakes are genuinely high and people are genuinely suffering. Trump stays on offense. He keeps the pressure on. He controls the narrative through volume and momentum. And for the audiences that follow him, that approach reads as power. Pope Leo XIV stays on message. He does not adjust his tone based on who is attacking him. He does not match the aggression. He does not compete for the news cycle. And for the audiences that follow him, that approach reads as something rarer and arguably more difficult to sustain. It reads as conviction. And maybe that is the real story here. Not who wins the news cycle this week, not who gets the bigger reaction online, but what this moment is forcing people to think about when it comes to the leaders they choose, the values they defend, and the vision of the world they are actually trying to build. Because the loudest person in the room is not always the most powerful one. And sometimes the strongest move is not fighting back. Sometimes it is simply refusing to move at all. If this moment got under your skin, if it made you think, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because this story is far from over, and the next chapter is going to hit even harder than this one.